Right now, somewhere within a few feet of you, there is a roll of soft, white quilted paper. You don't think about it. You never think about it. But for almost every human who has ever lived, that roll would have looked like pure magic. Because here's the situation. It's 30,000 years ago. You wake up on a cold morning somewhere in what will one day be called France. No alarm, no coffee, no phone to scroll. Just a dying fire, the smell of last night's dinner, and a slow, familiar pressure building in your gut. And here's the thing, nobody warns you about being a prehistoric human. There's no bathroom, there's no toilet, there's no soft, aloe-infused roll waiting patiently 3 feet away. There's no door, no walls, no little room with a lock. You go where you go, in full view of the camp, the local wildlife, and anyone who happens to glance over. So you walk a little way from the fire, you do what you have to do, and then you arrive at the moment. You look down at the grass, the leaves, the rocks, the snow, your own 2 bare hands, and you have to make a decision that we have completely erased from modern life. What do you reach for? Because the answer, what humans actually used for the hundreds of thousands of years before toilet paper existed, is stranger, grosser, and a lot more clever than you think, and what you grabbed came down to one thing, where you were born. Now, most people picture this and jump straight to the obvious answer. Leaves. A nice, broad, conveniently placed handful of leaves. Problem solved. Except leaves betray you. Constantly. They don't grow in a desert. They don't grow on a frozen tundra in the middle of an ice age. They vanish in winter, exactly when you need them most. And grab the wrong one in the dark, in a hurry, and you'll meet a kind of regret that lasts for days. Picture reaching down and coming back with a fistful of stinging nettles. That's a mistake you make exactly once. So this is not a small problem. This is a challenge that every human community had to quietly solve every single day for hundreds of thousands of years, with whatever the world around them happened to offer, and we handle it in a way almost no other animal does. Your dog has never once thought about this. A wolf doesn't carry wet wipes. Most animals are simply built, so it isn't really an issue. But somewhere along the line, we turned a biological problem into a cultural one. We built rules, tools, habits, and outright taboos around cleaning ourselves. And those systems changed completely depending on where people lived. So, which one you used came down to a single thing: geography. Because where you were born decided what you reached for. Born in a desert? Your toilet paper was the desert itself, sand and smooth, rounded stones, chosen, kept, and reused. To this day, some cultures still keep a smooth stone for exactly this. Born in a forest? You had options, and one of the best was moss. Soft, absorbent, surprisingly gentle. People used moss for this in plenty of places, and honestly, it holds up. A few broad leaves on top, and a forest dweller was doing just fine. Born on the coast? You reached into the tide. Fresh seaweed is smooth and pliable, and shells, mussel shells, clam shells, could become little scraping tools. Effective. If you were careful, very, very careful. Born in the frozen north? Your answer was right under your feet, a handful of snow. Bracingly cold, but it does the job. And then there's the method used by more human beings across more of history than every other method combined. And the one a huge part of the planet still uses right now, today, while you're watching this. Water. Across huge parts of the world, South Asia, the Middle East, much of Southeast Asia, water was the gold standard. Water and your left hand. And that one practical habit shaped whole cultures. It's a big reason the left hand became the unclean hand in so many places. The reason you greet and eat with your right. A toilet habit, echoing through thousands of years of etiquette. Plenty of cultures never adopted paper at all. They looked at washing with water, looked at scrubbing with dry paper, and quite reasonably decided water won. But a few civilizations got genuinely creative. Take Rome. Rome didn't improvise. Rome had a system. Picture a Roman public latrine, a long stone bench running around the walls, a row of round holes cut into it, side by side. No stalls, no dividers, no walls between you and your neighbor. You sat shoulder to shoulder with a dozen strangers and did your business while chatting about politics and the chariot races. It was a social event. And then there was the famous sponge stick. Roman sources mention a tool called a xylospongium or tersorium. a sea sponge fixed to a wooden handle. For generations, historians described it as a communal wiping tool, rinsed between uses in water, salt water, or vinegar, and passed from one person to the next. But here's the catch. The evidence is thinner than the legend. Some scholars argue it may have been less like shared toilet paper and more like a brush for cleaning the latrine itself. So the Roman butt sponge is possible, famous, genuinely horrifying, but not quite as settled as people think. We do have one grim story tangled up with it. The Roman writer Seneca describes a Germanic prisoner being prepared for an arena show who slipped away to a latrine and forced the sponge stick down his own throat rather than face the crowd. Seneca tells it as a story about will. It is also, unavoidably, a story about a toilet sponge, and Rome genuinely was advanced. The Cloaca Maxima, their great central sewer, was one of the engineering marvels of the ancient world, and parts of it still work today. But the personal hygiene side, let's just say it leaves something to be desired. The Greeks had their own approach, and it might be the pettiest, most human thing on this entire list. They used pessoi, small oval pieces of ceramic or stone, often just broken bits of pottery, smoothed at the edges, used to scrape yourself clean. Archaeologists have dug them up. We know they're real. And here's the part people love. The word ostracism comes from ostraca, the pottery shards Athenians used to vote someone into exile, scratching the person's name onto the shard. And some scholars believe name-inscribed shards were later reused as pessoi. If that's true, an ancient Greek could quite literally wipe himself with the name of his enemy. The word origin is solid. The wiping reuse is the theory, but it is a glorious theory. So while the Mediterranean was scraping with broken pottery, one civilization quietly leapt 1,000 years ahead of everyone else: China. China invented paper, and it did not take long for someone to realize what else paper was good for. The first clear written mention of using paper for the bathroom comes from the 6th century, from a scholar named Yanjatui, who noted, a little uncomfortably, that he wouldn't dare use paper printed with the names of sages for such a purpose, which tells you the practice was already common enough to need a rule. And it only got fancier. By the time of the great imperial courts, paper was being made specifically for the toilet, including soft, perfumed sheets produced just for the emperor and his household, custom toilet paper, scented for the emperor, while much of the rest of the world was still reaching for sand and snow. One civilization was, astonishingly, 1,000 years ahead on this one humble, universal problem. Travel east, and it gets even more refined. In ancient Japan, the tool of choice was the chugi, a thin, flat stick of wood or bamboo, smoothed down and used to scrape yourself clean. Archaeologists digging up old Japanese toilet sites have pulled these sticks out of the ground, including from Nara period contexts well over 1,000 years old. Practical, cheap, and very far from the soft paper we know today. Now here's the part that should genuinely bother you. After Rome fell, Europe didn't move forward. It moved backward. For 1,000 years, the medieval world mostly went back to basics: hay, straw, grass, moss, a handful of whatever was lying around the barn. In a castle, you'd visit the garderobe, the castle's toilet, a cold stone closet jutting out over the moat, with a hole that dropped straight down the outer wall, and you'd reach for a bundle of hay or a scrap of old rag. The wealthy upgraded to wool, soft lamb's wool, or strips of cloth. Everyone else may do. So picture this. At the same moment, China was perfuming paper for an emperor. A European lord was wiping with a fistful of hay in a freezing stone box hanging over a moat. Progress, it turns out, is not a straight line. But while Europe was reaching for hay, another part of the world was perfecting the opposite approach: water. Across the medieval Islamic world, washing after the toilet was woven into daily life and religious practice. Cleanliness treated as something serious and refined. It wasn't the same object as the later French bidet, but it came from the same basic insight: water cleans better than dry scraping. When the bidet finally appeared in France in the 1600s and 1700s as a fancy porcelain basin for the rich, it turned that old idea into expensive European furniture. Water, again, always water. Now, you might wonder how we even know all this, and the answer is one of archaeology's least glamorous treasures: ancient poop. Scientists study coprolites, fossilized human feces, along with the soil scraped out of ancient latrines. These unpleasant little time capsules are astonishingly informative. They tell us what people ate, how waste moved through a settlement, and, crucially, the eggs of the parasites those people carried: whipworm, roundworm, tapeworm, locked in the record for thousands of years. And this is the part that's genuinely not a joke. How you handled this problem could kill you. The danger was never just being unpleasant, it was transmission, a shared tool, a contaminated stream, a dirty hand that then prepared food. That's how parasites and deadly infection move through an entire community, quietly, invisibly, fatally. Getting this wrong didn't make you gross. It made you sick. Sometimes it killed you, and everyone you fed. Which makes it tempting to picture all these people as filthy savages who didn't know any better. That's completely wrong. Some of them were cleaner than you are. Consider the Indus Valley, the cities of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, which, more than 4,000 years ago, had planned streets, covered drains, bathing areas, and water running through the whole city, while much of the world was still squatting in an open field. Consider Rome's sewers, running for centuries. Consider the entire water-washing world, which by any honest measure was cleaner than a modern person armed with nothing but dry paper. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Toilet paper. The thing we treat as the very symbol of being civilized is arguably a step down from simply washing with water. And the thing that really changed wasn't just the cleaning material. It was the expectation of a private, dedicated room. Fields, pits, chamber pots, garderobes, communal latrines. For most of history, where and how you went depended entirely on your class and your corner of the world. Privacy existed, but not as the ordinary every home default we treat as normal today. That quiet little room with a lock is one of the youngest luxuries you own. So when does the roll finally show up? Embarrassingly late. Commercial toilet paper, as we'd recognize it, didn't appear until 1857, when an American named Joseph Gaiety started selling flat, medicated paper sheets, and he was so proud of them, he had his own name watermarked onto every single one. Rolled perforated paper came in the decades after, and it was rough. Paper manufacturing was still crude enough that, as late as the 1930s, Northern Tissue advertised its toilet paper as splinter-free. Whether that reflected real injuries or just brutally effective marketing, it's an insane phrase to see attached to toilet paper. Meanwhile, out in rural America, people used what they had: corn cobs for generations, and the pages of the Sears mail order catalog, which hung on a nail in countless outhouses for exactly that second purpose. And here's the final twist. Even now, with all our plumbing, our two-ply, our quilted, lotion-infused softness, dry paper alone is not universal. Across huge parts of Asia, the Middle East, and North Africa, people use water, sometimes instead of paper, sometimes alongside it. The roll feels normal to us. Globally, it's only one answer among many. So the next time you're sitting there, phone in hand, and you reach for that roll without a single conscious thought, stop just for a second and think about what that soft, disposable little luxury actually is. For almost every human being who has ever lived, all 117 billion of them, that roll did not exist. They used leaves and moss and sand and shells and snow and sponges and water and their own bare hands. They stood at the exact same moment you stood at this morning, and they solved it with whatever the world gave them every single day for as long as there have been people. You are the strange one. You are the lucky one. And you'll almost certainly never think about any of this again. Until tomorrow morning.